So my AP research project was strategic speaking advice from experienced high school speech and debate competitors. So first, to provide some context on why I selected this topic in the first place, the main reason is because public speaking is a vital skill in any career or context. So across industries, jobs, and even in high school, people have to focus on being competent at public speaking because it allows them to get their ideas across and be more convincing to other people. Specifically, articles like those from Forbes explain how public speaking allows people to project confidence, express their ideas, and create a sense of authority around other people, as well as express their opinions in a better manner. However, because this skill is such importance, often people face it but are afraid, as the chart from the National Institute of Mental Health shows that people fear public speaking more than things like death or spiders. And the fear comes from delivery. Specifically, my project focuses on the delivery side of public speaking because it is often the most difficult side for people. Often, people already have the content written and feel comfortable about it, but are struggling on how to deliver it and project to the audience. And the reason why this delivery is so important is because poor delivery makes the audience perceive the speaker as uncredible, but it also makes the speaker perceive themselves as more anxious, causing a cycle of increasingly poor delivery. Meaning that there are strategies that have been developed to improve delivery in public speaking and the audience's perception of speakers. These are called communication strategies in the research, and they are used to improve the speaker's delivery of their speech. The goal of these is to maximize audience engagement, or the connection between the speaker and the audience, and how much the audience believes the speaker's credibility. Additionally, I also selected speech and debate as the topic for study because of my participation in the activity. Mainly, I have participated in speech and debate throughout most of my high school career. Speech and debate is a competitive public speaking activity, mainly for high schoolers, but also middle schoolers and college students. There are many different events in speech and debate that focus on things from public speaking to debate. However, the two I selected to study in this study are original oratory and informative speaking. Both of these involve 10-minute pre-written speeches with or without visual aids, depending on the event and the tournament, that speakers prepare over the course of a year and deliver at competitive tournaments. These tournaments are then have rounds where judges rank 6 students' speeches against each other in a competitive aspect to determine which one is the best. This creates a unique situation where students aren't just speaking for a job or for a project, but rather they're doing it for the actual competition itself, meaning that they are more likely to fine-tune themselves in order to improve their audience's perception of them and receive a higher rank from their judge. These speeches being ranked competitively also encourage students to criticize themselves more and to be more conscious about what they're doing in their speeches to improve them. This also is valuable to me because public speaking has used to be a great fear of mine, but speech and debate has helped me overcome that fear by giving me both techniques that I can use to overcome it, and it helps others like that as well. Getting into the literature, there are 3 main sections. First is the communication strategies identified by most public speaking studies. Next are the gaps that I found emerging, and finally were the question that I emerged and the hypothesis I have for it. First is the concept of communication strategies, which are already identified and defined, but which was further defined by Ahmed et al. In 2022 as how speakers improve their skills, or a variety of techniques speakers use in delivery to improve the audience's perception of them and their skill in public speaking. There's a wide variety of these tools, and this list from Curtis et al. In 2015 also lists many of them, from things like pitch, to tonal variation, to volume changes, to gesturing. All of these are used by speakers to improve the audience's perception of them. The end goal of all of these communication strategies is to alleviate the fear of the audience, as Garberman et al. In 2011 explains, that often the speaker perceives themselves as more scared than the audience does, so it creates a self-fulfilling loop, where the speaker convinces themselves that they're scared, so they increase the amount of scaredness they show, so the audience believes they're more scared. So the end goal of this, or rather the end result of this, is that this fear distracts the audience, as Ambilcar in 2022 explains how fear distracts the audience, causing the audience to believe speakers less and less and perceive the speakers as more and more untrustworthy. Specific communication strategies that were listed by Curtis et al. In 2015, but I also found corroborated in other research, were things like preparation, which Jean-Pierre et al. In 2021 explains helps speakers be more well-prepared and better at performance. Preparation helps speakers feel more confident in their abilities, and also helps speakers deliver their presentations better and feel more confident. Speakers preparing before when they speak generally tend to perceive in a more positive light than the audience. And the audience also perceives these speakers as more trustworthy, as they seem more confident and knowledgeable about what they're talking about. Another trend that I saw emerging in the studies comes from eye contact, which Miller et al. In 2017 specifically explains as how the speaker manages eye contact with the audience. This is important as it creates a connection with the audience that is important for them to trust you, as often audiences perceive speakers poorly who fail to maintain consistent eye contact or who stare for too long or look around too quickly. Meanwhile, speakers who are able to manage their eye contact create a better perception in the audience's minds, as they are perceived to be more credible, as well as form a deeper connection with the audience that improves the audience's reception of their arguments. The third thing that emerged was the concept of tonal variation, which Flynn in 2014 explains preventing things like spontaneity and also flags important context. Specifically, speakers often lapse into monotone voices when they're speaking, especially when they're nervous. However, tonal variation can be used to prevent speakers, for the audience from getting bored with speakers, and also allows them to flag important content. The final thing is passion, which Ambilcar in 2022 identifies as allowing for authentic engagement from the audience, creating a relationship where the audience perceives the speaker as truly caring about what they're saying and thus more likely to believe them. In addition, in context with all of this, Dornier in 1995 identifies that these strategies are not born into someone, but rather can be taught, and most importantly, improved with practice. However, in all this research, I identified two key gaps for my research. First was speech and debate. Speech and debate, being mostly done by high schoolers, is difficult for research to be conducted on because they are part of a protected population. However, speech and debate is a unique aspect of public speaking, as rather than doing it out of necessity, they're doing it for competition, meaning they're more intentional about their speech style. Additionally, another gap was populations. As I mentioned before, most studies often interview college students, as high school students are a protected population. But these high school students that I'm interviewing also have a unique reason for public speaking, mainly competitive aspects and improving their public speaking skills, which is unique compared to other research. This led to my research question: what similarities exist in the techniques speech and debate finalists use for effective public speaking? And I hypothesized that the answer to this question will first be broad agreement amongst all of my participants, as they're all in a similar context and taught in similar ways, so they will likely have similar advice. I also believe that they will agree with research themes, as they learn their techniques through experts whose expertise is often reflected in research studies, meaning they are all drawing on the same pool of expertise, and thus will likely have same analysis as the studies. In order to answer this question, I conducted a semi-structured interview based off a parent study of Heineke in 2022. I contacted 5 total participants, but however, due to limited contactability, I wasn't able to get as many as I wanted. However, I decided to keep the number this low in order to preserve equality in respondents, as all of these participants had placed top 6 at competitive local tournaments or national tournaments, meaning they were experts on speech and debate and likely would have good analysis to give. I interviewed these participants in a semi-structured manner based off the Heineke study because of how a semi-structured interview allows them to express their expertise due to being able to ask follow-up questions, but also keeps their answers in a current topic area to make coding easier, so I'm able to analyze them and compare them to other things. However, I altered the Heineke study's questions, mainly changing terminology from common to that of speech and debate terminology, such as changing things like public speaking event to tournament, and excluding things beyond the scope of the study to make the interview more focused and shorter and easier to code. I interviewed participants either on Zoom or in person, and then transcribed this transcript using Otter AI. Specifically, I used coding based off the Heineke study in a 3-step approach on the transcripts. First, I identified anything that could be considered advice. Then I took these identified segments and wrote them in a common term, shifting them from what the speakers were saying to a common language across all 5 of the transcripts. Once I had done this, I then grouped all of these different pieces of advice into buckets, using these to identify the 4 major themes that I saw emerging. However, compared to the Heineke study, I used a more specific filter. Where the study used things like speaking style as their buckets, I used more specific things like tonal variation or eye contact. And from this, I found 4 major themes emerging. Mainly, first, that there was broad agreement among all the participants in areas of passion, preparation, eye contact, and tone, and that they all generally agreed with the broad research consensus. The first area I found was this idea of passion, as participant 3 expresses, how the audience can tell when people are delivering something they don't really care about. The sentiment was expressed in similar ways by every other participant, all saying that the speaker caring about what they're saying is reflected in how they speak, and that the audience can subsequently perceive this. And they said that this passion increases the trust the audience has in the speaker, as the audience is more likely to believe they truly care what they're saying, and that they actually believe what they're saying, both of which increases the audience's ability to believe the speaker credibly. And this is backed up by the research, as Amilcar in 2022 also identifies similar statements, saying speakers should select topics they're passionate about as the audience can perceive this. Meaning, with this broad consensus in both the research and among my participants, it is likely safe to conclude that passion is important and that speakers should talk about things they care about to improve their perception. The next theme I saw emerging was preparation, specifically with a quote like that seen from participant 2, who describes how topic knowledge makes a speaker seem more confident and adjust to situations better. Every other participant identified similar methods of preparing, with things like recording and rewatching performances or performing in front of families and peers to get feedback. The end goal of this is for the speaker to be more prepared when on stage or delivering in order to be able to adjust to hiccups in the speech, as well as being able to seem more confident and answer questions from the audience if any appear. This means that this also agrees with the current research, as John Pierre et al. In 2021 also explains, that in general, speakers who prepare more are perceived in a more favorable way from the audience, but also it leads to a smoother speech from the speaker, as they feel more confident in themselves. As I mentioned before, anxiety is a critical threat to a confident public speaking performance, so often when speakers feel more prepared by preparing before their speech, they feel more confident and deliver better speeches. This means it's safe to conclude both from the wide variety of research, as well as the agreement among participants, or speakers rather, should prepare ahead of time in order to maximize the quality of their speeches. The third theme that I saw emerging was eye contact, specifically as participant 5 explains that the biggest behavior one is going to notice is eye contact. Every other speaker also identified the importance of having a consistent eye contact. However, this is more in variation rather than holding eye contact for too long, as they all identified two ends of a scale, where a speaker either stares at their audience for too long, making them uncomfortable, or dashes around too quickly, making the audience feel as though they're nervous. However, there was difference in the actual technique for eye contact variation, where some participants held eye contact for only 5 to 10 seconds, and others, like participants 2, 3, and 5, said they switched it after phrases, leading to a small difference in how long they held it. However, there is still broad agreement over eye contact, with studies like Miller et al. In 2017, who identifies that eye contact should be meaningfully changed and used by speakers to create a relationship with the audience, as it creates both a connection and pursues confidence from the speaker to make the audience more likely to believe them. Meaning that with this broad consensus, eye contact should be made meaningfully by speakers, changing it in a consistent manner. The final theme that emerged was tone. Specifically, all participants identified balancing a conversational versus impactful tone, using a conversational tone to explain things that are less important but still good to hear versus impactful tones, which are used to express ideas that are crucial to the speech and often involve slowing down and raising your volume. However, they also agree over the use and style of this, as they generally say that you should not overuse either type of tone and need to use them in balance to improve perception. This agrees with the research, as Fleehan in 2014 also explains that this vocal variation of shifting between tones keeps the audience engaged, as you avoid becoming monotone and the audience knows when they should be listening and when they don't have to hang on to every word. This broad agreement means it's likely safe to conclude that tonal variation should be included in a speech to prevent your speech from becoming boring due to it being monotone. So, answering the question, what similarities exist in the technique finalists use to prepare for speech and debate competition, the answer is that there's broad consensus in the 4 main areas I listed, mainly passion, preparation, eye contact, and tone, and that this aligns with the research. This, in total, aligned with my hypothesis, as all of the participants had broad consensus amongst themselves, but also broad consensus compared to the research, so I was correct in predicting this. The importance of the study is that public speaking has a broad role in society and that this can improve the expression of ideas, as often people are able to express their opinions better, as articles I mentioned in the intro identified, so that the advice given by these speakers could be crucial for people improving their argumentation and explaining of their opinions. The implications of this study are that many participants in my study and other studies identified how poor expression of ideas is a common issue, with studies like Gubberman and Haydock in 2011, as well as participants identifying that being able to improve your public speaking skills means people can express the good ideas they're likely having in a way that convinces others so they get used. There's also a large sphere of public speaking that I mentioned before, and that how these techniques can be used to overcome this based off other studies, where public speaking techniques allow people to feel more confident and overcome a common anxiety around speech, or rather around public speaking. There were 2 major limitations for my study. The first was the relatively small pool of participants due to a lack of being able to contact high school students. However, other studies can improve on this by being larger and maybe conducting surveys rather than interviews to be more efficient with time while still getting the speaker's experience. Additionally, there was a lack of input from audience members themselves, so further studies could likely conduct polls of audience members to see what techniques speakers identify, but also how they impact the audience, and see if what the speakers are saying is truly backed up by the claim, or rather is backed up by the audience.
Fantastic, Charlie. That seems to get better every time you deliver. How did your review of the methods that were used by scholars in the field help to inform your choice of method?
Yeah, so when I initially conducted my inquiry into this field, I saw a lot of methods were either analyzing previous speeches or going to college classes and analyzing those speeches. So I found that there was a gap in the people I was going to be researching, mainly high school speech and debaters. What I also found in a parent study, someone who was doing something very similar to me, mainly interviewing experts on public speaking and trying to gain their advice and their similarities. So I used their approach of a semi-structured interview to shape this own research, because I found that since they were doing something so similar, I should use their methods as they had argued for it and backed it up, and so I should use their arguments as well.
How do your findings provide directions for future research in the field?
Yeah, so mainly my findings both conclude that there is likely broad consensus among these high school speech and debaters, which could lead to further research on a larger scale to see if this broad consensus is truly broad amongst a large population of high school speech and debaters, or in general expert public speakers. It also sets up the question of if these speakers' beliefs and techniques that work are true, or if they're just believed by the speaker. So it could be true that the audience doesn't think any of these are important and other things are important, or they could agree with these speakers. So a study could analyze what the audience thinks of these techniques.
So how did you handle the uncertainty aspects of the research process, especially like you mentioned, not having as many people as you would like?
Yeah, so the main thing I did was making sure to do everything way more times than I think I would need to. For example, I tried to reach out to 10 to 15 people, as many as I possibly could, knowing that I'd probably have a relatively low response rate just to do how busy people are. I also made sure to keep reminding people of interview times and just making sure that I didn't forget something or wasn't lazy with something, and did it enough times to feel secure and confident that I would get the results I wanted. I also planned out how many responses I would get and where I would go from there. Luckily, I got enough responses to feel confident moving forward with the study and not trying to gather more data through a survey or something. But I always had a backup plan in case I wasn't able to get enough participants, or the participants themselves weren't available to show up for interviews.